The first time my sons tried to take my house, they did it while I was still wearing my hospital bracelet. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my left wrist wrapped in paper tape from the emergency room, staring at the deed papers they had thrown in front of me like I was some confused old woman who would just sign anything if they spoke loudly enough. My two sons stood on opposite sides of the table, both in expensive shoes, both looking impatient, both acting like they owned the air in the room. "This is the smartest thing for everyone," my oldest son, Grant, said. He had his father's jaw and none of his father's patience. "You can't keep living here alone. The market is hot. We sell now, split the proceeds, and put you somewhere safe." "Somewhere safe?" I repeated. My younger son, Caleb, leaned against the counter with his arms folded. "Mom, be realistic. This place is too big for you. You're 72 years old." I looked at both of them and felt something in me go cold. Not because they wanted the house. Houses can be replaced. It was the way they were looking at me, like I was a problem they were trying to solve. Then the front door opened, and my daughter came in carrying a paper bag with soup containers from the diner where she worked the lunch shift. She froze the second she saw them. My poor daughter Emily always knew something was wrong before anyone said a word. She was 38, tired in the eyes, with her brown hair pulled back and her waitress shoes squeaking softly on my tile floor. She worked double shifts, rented a tiny apartment across town, and still came by after work to check my blood pressure, bring groceries, and make sure I had taken my medicine. Her brothers called her irresponsible because she never made the kind of money they did. What they never bothered to notice was that she was the only one who still showed up. Emily set the soup bag down slowly. "What's going on?" Grant didn't even look at her when he answered. "Mom's signing the listing papers." Emily's eyes moved to me. "You're selling the house?" "I'm trying to make them stop talking long enough for me to think," I said. Caleb gave a short, humorless laugh. "There's nothing to think about. We've already done the math. You can't afford repairs. Taxes are climbing, and if something happens to you in here, we'll all be dealing with a nightmare." I stared at him. "Something happening to me? You mean like what? Falling down the stairs? Dying in my sleep? Or do you mean something like being pushed into a nursing home before I'm ready?" Grant's face tightened. "Nobody said nursing home." "No," Emily said quietly. "You only implied it. That was the beginning. But it wasn't the first betrayal. That began months earlier, after my husband, Walter, died." Walter had been a quiet man, the kind who repaired a loose railing without being asked, kept a cookie tin full of spare screws, and believed a home was sacred because it held the living proof of a family's life. We built that house together when the boys were still in school, and Emily was just a little girl with missing front teeth who loved to draw flowers on the back of grocery receipts. Walter was gone before any of them were ready to be honest about themselves. He had left the house in my name and told me, with that crooked little smile of his, "You keep the walls. The children can fight over the furniture later." I thought he was joking. Grant and Caleb came home the week after the funeral with polished faces and expensive coffee, acting generous because grief looked good on them from a distance. Grant owned part of a consulting firm in Chicago. Caleb ran a construction company outside Columbus and drove a truck that cost more than my first car and my last 2 refrigerators combined. They lived in houses with guest bathrooms bigger than my kitchen. Emily, who had the least money of all of them, came every single day. She changed the sheets on my bed after I cried through them. She cooked in my kitchen. She sat with me on the back porch when I couldn't breathe from missing Walter so badly it felt like somebody had reached inside my ribs and torn something loose. And while she was washing dishes and rubbing my shoulders and filling my pill organizer, her brothers were busy asking questions. How much is the house worth now? Have you updated the deed? Did Dad leave a will? Did he have any accounts we don't know about? At first I thought they were just settling the estate. Then I noticed they were never asking whether I had eaten or slept, or whether the loneliness was swallowing me alive. They only cared about what could be divided. The first time Grant hinted at selling, he did it over coffee in my living room. "Mom," he said, "this place is a lot of maintenance. Roof, plumbing, landscaping, taxes. You can't expect Emily to keep doing all that." Emily doesn't ask to be paid, I said. Grant gave me a careful look. That's nice of her, but kindness doesn't scale. I remember that sentence because it made me look at him differently. Not angry, not even sad, just differently. Like I was finally seeing the person under the expensive coat. Caleb was worse. He was blunt in a way people mistake for honesty. One afternoon, when Emily had gone to work and I was folding laundry in the bedroom, he came in carrying a folder. I spoke with a realtor, he said. If we list soon, we can probably get enough to clear the remaining bills and still have a good split. What remaining bills? The property taxes, the furnace repair, the lawn, the bathroom leak in the upstairs hall. I frowned. What bathroom leak? He held my gaze a second too long. You didn't know? I did know, actually. Emily had known. She had called a friend of hers who worked at the hardware store. She had spent 2 Saturdays under the sink with a flashlight and a wrench. She just hadn't told me because she didn't want me to worry. That was Emily. She never made a performance out of her love. After Caleb left, I found her that night in the kitchen with a bruised finger and a takeout bag from her diner job. Did you fix the leak? I asked. She looked up, startled. It was nothing. You should have told me. And what would you have done, Mom? Called the boys? They would have sent a plumber, billed it to your house, and acted like they'd saved the day. That stung because it was true. I looked at my daughter sitting under the yellow light in my old kitchen, too tired to pretend, and I felt guilty. For years I had worried that she had made bad choices because she never seemed to get ahead. Her brothers made that guilt worse. They talked about her the way wealthy people talk about the weather, as if she were an unfortunate condition instead of their sister. She's always one emergency away from disaster, Grant had once told me. At least, she has a soul, I answered. He laughed like I'd said something quaint. I wish I could say the fight over the house began with one explosive argument. It didn't. It began with small cruelties. Grant would arrive unannounced with documents and a stressed expression, talking fast and soft, the way people do when they want you to feel foolish for asking questions. Caleb started mentioning memory care homes in a casual voice, as if he were discussing grocery stores. Then they began calling Emily by her old nickname, the one she hated because they knew it irritated her. Still waiting tables? Caleb asked one Sunday. She's not waiting tables, I snapped. Oh, sorry, he said with a grin. Serving tables. Emily's face went white, and that was the first time I saw her anger instead of her patience. Say that again, she told him. He shrugged. Just saying, some people get stuck. Emily stared at him for a long moment, then picked up her purse. You know what's funny? The people who talk the most about being stuck usually built the cage themselves. Grant actually looked offended. We're trying to help. No, she said, opening the front door. You're trying to collect. I should have understood then what they were really doing. But grief makes fools of everyone. I kept hoping they were just being selfish, not cruel. There's a difference, and it matters. The real problem started when Caleb showed up with a woman named Tara from his office. She wore a cream blazer and a smile so practiced it looked painted on. This is a senior estate advisor, Caleb told me. I'm a realtor, Tara corrected lightly. She laid out glossy papers and explained that my house could be listed quickly, that the equity could help me transition gracefully, and that if I signed a few temporary documents, my sons could manage the process for me. Manage. The word lodged under my skin. I told her I would think about it. Grant, who had been silent most of the meeting, finally leaned forward. Mom, be honest. Are you saying no because you don't want to sell or because Emily got in your head? My daughter had been standing by the window, arms folded so tightly she looked like she was holding herself together by force. I turned to him. Do not put your sister in this. She's the one who benefits most from keeping you isolated here, he said. Emily's head snapped around. Excuse me? Grant shrugged. You live in a cheap apartment and work for tips. If Mom keeps the house, maybe someday she'll pass it to you. I heard the ugly calculation underneath his voice. He had just said what he believed, that poverty must mean greed, and love must be fake if it came from someone who couldn't afford designer shoes. Emily looked at me then, not at him. Mom, I don't want your house. That was the truth. I knew it immediately because she sounded insulted that anyone would think otherwise. But Grant smiled like he had caught her in a lie. "Sure," he said. Emily's hands trembled at her sides. "I don't want the house. I want you to stop acting like she's a piece of property." Caleb laughed. "You'd change your mind if you knew what it's worth." "I know exactly what it's worth," she said. "I live next to people who can barely pay rent. I know what homes cost. I know what rent does to people. I know what money does to families. I just don't think everything has a price." There was such hurt in that sentence that I nearly called the whole meeting off. But Grant had already become stubborn, and Caleb had already become defensive, and once men like that smell money, they don't let go easily. A week later, I came home from a doctor's appointment and found Caleb in my hallway with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked. He stood up too fast. "Checking dimensions." "For what?" He glanced toward the front door. "A buyer wants to know if a wall could be opened." "What buyer?" He sighed, as if I were a child asking questions during church. "Mom, don't make this harder. There are already interested parties." In the living room, 2 pieces of my wedding china were packed in a box. My chest tightened. "Who packed those?" His silence was answer enough. I went to the kitchen and saw even more. The old silver tray Walter's mother had given us. The framed photograph of Emily at age 7 in her green Easter dress. The hand-carved little wooden horse Walter had whittled for Grant when he was a baby. "Stop," I said. Caleb put the tape measure down. "We're not stealing anything." "Then why are you moving my things?" "Because if you wait too long, everything becomes a fight." I turned on him so fast he stepped back. "You are fighting right now." He exhaled, annoyed. "Mom, listen. You're emotional. That's understandable. But you're not thinking clearly about the future. The house ties up too much of your net worth." I stared at him. "My net worth?" He realized too late how ugly it sounded. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then what did you mean?" He had no answer. That evening, Emily arrived to find me sitting at the kitchen table in tears. She put her work bag down and knelt beside me like she had done when she was a child. "Tell me everything," she whispered. And, for the first time, I did. I told her about the moving boxes, the realtor, the tape measure, the pressure. I told her about how Grant had started talking about my decline in front of me, and how Caleb had casually mentioned that people my age sometimes resist necessary transitions. Emily listened without interrupting, but her face got harder with every word. When I finished, she said, "They're trying to scare you into signing." "I know, and they're probably hoping you'll trust them because they're your sons." I wiped my eyes. "I should have raised them better." Emily's expression softened. "You raised them in the same house. They chose different roads." That night, she stayed until after midnight, going through old paperwork with me. Tax records, utility bills, insurance statements. Then, from the bottom drawer of Walter's desk, she pulled out a slim blue folder I had forgotten existed. Inside was a trust document. I blinked at it. Walter never showed me this. Emily read the first page and frowned. "Mom," he made amendments. My hands were shaking as I leaned closer. The trust had been updated 6 years ago, after Walter's first heart scare. It stated that the house could not be sold without my consent. It also contained a note from Walter's attorney saying any future modifications would require a current review of family contributions toward upkeep and residence. "What does that mean?" I asked. Emily's eyes moved over the page, and then something changed in her expression. She reached into the folder and pulled out stapled receipts. "These are repairs," she said. "Look at the dates." I took one paper after another: roof patching, plumbing supplies, furnace parts, property tax payments. Then I saw the names. Emily R. Emily R. paid the tax bill 3 years in a row. Emily R. bought the shingles for the back roof. Emily R. paid for the new sump pump after the basement flooded. And then I saw one final receipt, folded into quarters. It was for the mortgage balance that remained after Walter died. Paid in full. By Emily. I stared at the page, unable to breathe. "No." Emily's face turned frightened instantly. Mom, I didn't want you to know because you would have tried to pay me back. I knew you were grieving, and the boys weren't helping, and I had some savings from the diner and the extra weekend cleaning work, and You paid off the house? I didn't want the bank sniffing around. I didn't want you worrying. I just wanted you safe. I couldn't speak. My daughter, who everyone called poor, had kept my home standing while my wealthy sons argued over its value. She had sacrificed her own tiny life to protect mine, and she never once asked for applause. It wasn't just that they were wrong. It was that they had been wrong about the only person in the family whose heart was actually full. The next morning, I called Grant and Caleb and asked them to come over. They arrived together, both tense, both irritated, both prepared to charm or bully me depending on which tactic seemed likely to work first. Emily was there too, sitting quietly at the end of the table. I placed the folder in front of them. Grant opened it first. His expression shifted as he skimmed the pages. Caleb leaned in, saw the receipts, and his mouth tightened. "What is this?" Grant asked. "It's proof," I said, "that while you were trying to sell my house, your sister was paying for the house to survive." Caleb looked at Emily. "You paid these?" She gave him a flat look. "Amazing, right? A waitress can read a bill." "Why wouldn't you tell us?" Grant asked. Emily laughed once, bitter and tired. "Tell you? So you could do what exactly? Congratulate me? Or tell Mom I was manipulating her?" Grant slammed the folder shut. "This doesn't change the fact that the house has value." "No," I said. "It changes who has earned the right to talk about it." Caleb set his jaw. "Mom, be careful. If you start making this personal, you'll regret it." I looked at him. "It is personal. It has always been personal. You only noticed the house when you thought it was worth cash." "I'm your son," he said sharply. "You are," I replied. "And that's the part that hurts." Grant leaned back in his chair. "So what are you saying? That because Emily paid bills, she gets the house?" "I'm saying," I told him, "that the house is not a prize for the loudest child. It belongs to the person who loved me enough to preserve it." Caleb's face reddened. "This is ridiculous." Emily had been quiet the whole time. Now she spoke in a low voice. "You two haven't stepped foot in this kitchen to help with anything in months. Mom has been dizzy, the roof was leaking, and I spent my days off patching damage you didn't even notice. But the second there's equity, suddenly you care about her safety." Grant jabbed a finger at the folder. "You hid this from us on purpose." "I hid it because you don't understand the difference between family and inheritance," she said. "You thought being blood-related meant you were owed something." I watched my sons go still at that. Sometimes shame is so rare in certain people that when it finally reaches them, it looks like confusion. Grant stood up first. "Fine. Keep the house. But don't expect us to bail you out when the property taxes come due." Emily gave a small, sad smile. "You really think that was ever your job?" Caleb pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "You'll regret this." I looked at him. "No, I regret trusting you. That should have been the end of it. I wish I could tell you my sons accepted the truth and apologized and became better men. But greed never leaves quietly. It only changes its clothes." 2 days later, I got a call from a man named Darius Bell, the attorney who had handled Walter's original estate plan. He sounded alarmed. "Mrs. Hill," he said, "I need you to come in immediately. There are attempts to challenge the trust." I felt my stomach drop. "By whom?" He paused, just long enough for me to know he already knew. "Your sons have submitted documentation suggesting diminished capacity." I gripped the phone. "Diminished capacity? They are claiming you may not fully understand the trust documents you signed." My voice went flat. "So they're trying to have me declared incompetent?" "Yes," he said carefully. "And there's more. They've also attached a proposed conservatorship." I sat down hard. A conservatorship. A legal cage. A way to take control of my life, my money, and my house by saying I was too old to be trusted with my own mind. Emily took the phone from my hand when she saw my face change. "What?" she asked into it, then listened. Her shoulders tightened as she absorbed the details. "No, absolutely not. We'll be there this afternoon." When she hung up, she looked at me with fury in her eyes I had never seen before. "They're not just greedy," she said. "They're trying to erase you." That was the moment my grief turned into something sharper. At the attorney's office, Grant and Caleb sat on one side of the conference table. Darius sat at the head. Emily sat beside me with her jaw set. I had my cane in my hand, though I rarely used it. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to know that being old did not mean being weak. Darius cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, I've reviewed your filing. It is not only inappropriate, it is unsupported." Grant tried to smile. "We're just concerned about our mother." "No," Darius said evenly. "You are concerned about the house." Caleb shifted in his chair. "That's unfair." "Is it?" Darius slid a paper across the table. "Because your petition mentions the property value 6 times. Because your petition mentions the property value 6 times. It mentions your mother's confusion 3 times. It does not mention her care, her living conditions, or the fact that she was recently discharged from the hospital." I watched Caleb's face harden. Darius continued, "It also does not mention that the mortgage was paid off by your sister." Grant's eyes snapped to Emily. "Why does that matter?" "Because," Darius said, "she is the only reason this house remained solvent after your father died." The room went quiet. Then Darius opened another file and turned it toward them. "And because, in the last 3 months, both of you have made attempts to move furniture, photograph the interior, and obtain signatures from your mother while she was medicated." Grant's expression changed. "That's a lie." Darius raised a brow. "Then perhaps you can explain why your text message to a realtor says, 'Once Mom's on board, we can list before Emily catches up.'" Caleb went pale. Emily looked at me sharply. "You saved their texts?" "I told you," I said. "I'm old, not stupid." The attorney placed the phone transcript copies on the table like evidence in a courtroom. Grant's face turned from disbelief to fury. "You went through our phones?" "No," I said. "You went through my life." That was the line that landed. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true. And still, they didn't back down completely. Greed rarely does, until it meets consequences. Caleb stood. "Fine. Sell the house. Split the money. Pay whatever tax or legal mess there is, and move on. This fighting is embarrassing." I let that sit for a second, then answered, "You know what is embarrassing? A grown man who sees his mother as a liquidity event." Even Darius had to look down at the table to hide his expression. The hearing for the conservatorship was set 2 weeks later. By then, the whole thing had become a family scandal, though nobody outside the courthouse knew the details. Grant and Caleb arrived, dressed like men about to pitch a merger. Emily wore a navy dress from a thrift shop and a pair of shoes she'd had repaired 3 times. I wore Walter's old pearl pin on my blouse. The judge was a practical-looking woman with a calm voice and a face that gave nothing away. Grant's lawyer started with the usual language: concern for the elderly, burden of upkeep, risk of exploitation. Caleb sat with his hands clasped like he was in prayer. Then Darius spoke. He didn't make me sound helpless. He made me sound accurate. He described my medical condition, which was manageable. He described the house, which was maintained. He described Emily's unpaid labor, the hidden financial support, the receipts, the trust. He then played the message Grant had sent to the realtor. The judge's eyebrow rose slightly when she heard it. Then Darius introduced one last piece of evidence. It was a notarized letter from Walter, dated 18 months before he died. In it, he wrote that if the day came when Grant or Caleb tried to pressure me into selling the house against my wishes, the house shall remain with the person who has cared for it, and for Margaret with the most consistency and sacrifice. My hands shook when I saw the letter because Walter had known. He had seen this coming, maybe years before I did. The judge read it twice. Then she looked at Grant and Caleb. "So let me understand this. The mother is competent. The house is secure. The mortgage has been paid off by the daughter. Yet you filed for conservatorship because you wanted to force a sale." Grant opened his mouth, then shut it. Caleb tried a different tactic. "Your Honor, it was meant as a temporary arrangement." "For whom?" she asked. He had no answer. The judge denied the petition on the spot, but she did not stop there. She referred the matter for investigation after noting that several of the filings appeared to contain misleading statements about my medical status and my property management. It was the kind of official language that sounds polite until the consequences arrive. Outside the courtroom, Grant exploded. "This is because of you," he hissed at Emily. She stared at him, exhausted and calm. "No, this is because of you. You've always been jealous." Emily blinked at him. "Of what? Your mortgage?" Caleb stepped forward, his face red. "You think you won because you played the victim?" That finally made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You have confused silence with weakness for so long," I said, "that you don't know what a real loss looks like." Grant looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. And maybe he was. The consequences started quietly. First, the realtor withdrew from the listing after seeing the judge's order. Then Caleb's company lost a contract when the county discovered discrepancies in his paperwork. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical, just the slow, humiliating unraveling that happens when people who thought the world would bend for them learn that rules are real. Grant's wife, who had sat through years of his smugness in silence, found out about the conservatorship filing and moved out for a month. To think. From what I heard later, she found the idea of him trying to institutionalize his mother deeply unattractive. Emily didn't celebrate. She simply kept showing up. She still brought soup, still mowed the small patch of lawn with the broken mower, still changed the filters in the furnace and checked the windows before winter. But now she did it with a steadiness I recognized as grief turning into peace. One afternoon, about 3 months after the hearing, I found her in the attic sorting through old boxes. "What are you doing up here?" I asked. She held up a stack of photographs, trying to save the family history before the boys decide it belongs in a dumpster. I climbed the last few steps slowly and sat beside her on the floorboards. In the box between us were things I had forgotten existed. Walter's watch, the boys' elementary school report cards, Emily's drawing from 2nd grade of our house with a crooked tree and a sun in the corner. She held the drawing and smiled. "You kept this?" "Of course I did, but I was just some little kid. You were my little kid." She swallowed hard and looked away fast, because she always hated crying in front of me. I touched her arm. "I'm sorry," I said. Her head came up. "For what?" "For not seeing sooner how much you gave." Emily let out a shaky breath. "Mom, you saw. You just didn't know how to say it." That might have been the truest thing anyone had said to me in years. The final blow came when Caleb's investigation turned up a pattern of misused client funds in his company's books. He had not taken enough to become a headline, but enough to become a problem. Enough to lose licenses, contracts, and the trust of people who had once called him dependable. Grant, meanwhile, got dragged into a separate audit after trying to use family assets as collateral in a deal he had no business making. The men who had walked into my kitchen like kings began learning a new kind of humility, the kind bought with attorneys, fines, and the realization that every shortcut eventually becomes a ledger. They both came to my house one cold Sunday evening after everything had settled down. I knew they were there because the dogs next door started barking and the porch light caught their shadows through the glass. I opened the door, but I did not invite them in right away. Grant looked older somehow, his confidence worn thin. Caleb's shoulders had lost that permanent defensive hunch and now simply looked tired. "We need to talk," Grant said. I stepped aside and let them enter. Emily was in the kitchen. She glanced up once and then went back to stirring a pot of chili. She was not hiding, not forgiving, not performing, just living. Grant cleared his throat. "We wanted to apologize." I did not answer. Caleb looked at the floor. "We handled things badly." "Badly?" Emily said from the stove. "You tried to have Mom declared incompetent." He flinched. "I know." Grant rubbed his forehead. "We thought the house was the issue." "It wasn't the issue," I said. "It was the excuse." The room went quiet. The furnace clicked softly in the corner. Caleb swallowed. "We were angry." "At whom?" I asked. He didn't answer quickly enough. "Not at your father," I said. He's gone. Not at life, not at money. At her. I pointed to Emily. Because she loved me in a way you could not turn into leverage. Grant looked up at me, and for the first time there was no performance in his face. Just shame. I didn't know how to be the son you wanted, he said. I nodded slowly. No, you didn't know how to be a son at all. That sentence hurt me to say, but truth often does. He blinked hard. Caleb stepped forward and slipped a folded check onto the table. We paid back the money Emily put into the roof repairs and the taxes. It's not enough, but it's a start. Emily stared at the check and then at him. I didn't ask for it. I know. Then why now? Caleb's voice dropped. Because for once I understood what I had taken. That was the closest thing to a real apology either of them had ever given me. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't enough to erase years of neglect. But it was something. I picked up the check, looked at it, and set it back down. You'll return everything you took from this house, I said. Or you'll keep dealing with the court, and you'll do it without trying to bully your sister, because if either of you ever call her poor again, you'll learn exactly how expensive your arrogance has been. Grant nodded once. Caleb's eyes were glassy. Do we get to see you? I almost laughed. The question was so late, it felt like it belonged to another lifetime. You can call before you come, I said. And if you come in here to negotiate again, the door will stay shut. They left without argument. After they were gone, Emily set 2 bowls of chili on the table and sat across from me. Well, she said softly. That was weird. I smiled despite myself. Yes, very. She looked around the kitchen, this old room that had held the best and worst of us. You know what's funny? What? They thought they were fighting over the house. I followed her gaze to the walls, the table, the old clock Walter had hung with his own hands. But they were really fighting over who had a heart, she said. I nodded, and suddenly the tears came. Not the sharp, ugly tears from fear, but the kind that arrive when grief finally steps aside and lets love be felt without punishment. Emily crossed the table and took my hand. I had spent so long thinking I might have to choose between my children. But in the end, the choice had already been made by their lives, not my wishes. 2 sons had money, status, and all the polished emptiness they could carry. My daughter had very little money, and a heart so full it had kept an entire house standing. In the spring, I did something Walter would have loved. I turned the house into what it had always been in spirit, a home again. I put Emily's old drawings on the hallway wall. I moved Walter's watch into a shadow box. I gave the back bedroom to my grandson when he came to stay for summer break. And when the lilacs bloomed by the porch, Emily and I sat out front with iced tea and listened to the neighborhood kids ride their bikes past like the world hadn't been broken after all. Grant and Caleb still exist in my life, but they are no longer the center of it. They learned the hard way that inheritance is not the same thing as love. One is paper, the other is sacrifice. As for Emily, the poor daughter they mocked, she never walked away with the house. She walked away with my heart, though, in the end, that was never really a loss. It was the only thing in the whole family that had been worth protecting.